Hello my dear students, welcome back to the session of history. We are on lesson number 1, tracing changes through 1,000 years. Now in this chapter we are going to learn what are the sources through which we can trace to the historical changes and contexts. Then we are also going to learn the new and old terminologies, then historians and their sources, and also new social and political groups. So let's start with the chapter. Take a look at map 1 and 2. Map 1 was made in 1154 CE by the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi. The section reproduced here is a detail of the Indian subcontinent from its larger map of the world. Map 2 was made in 1720s by French cartographer. The two maps are quite different even though they are of the same area. In Al-Idrisi map, South India is where we would expect to find North India, and Sri Lanka is the island at the top. Place names are marked in Arabic. So according to the Al-Idrisi's map, South India are supposed to found in the South India is where we would expect to find North India. In the South India, we know that it is in the southern parts, but according to his map, it is in the North India. And Sri Lanka is in the southern region, but it is found in the islands at the top of the South India in the northern region. And there are some well-known names like Kanauji in Uttar Pradesh. Map 2 was made nearly 600 years after Map 1, during which time information about subcontinent has changed considerably. This map seems more familiar to us, and the coastal areas in particular are surprisingly detailed. This map was used by European sailors and merchants on their voyages. Voyages means journey. Now in map 2, the subcontinent from the early 18th century Atlas Novio of Guillaume de Isle. Equally important is the fact that the science of cartography differed in two periods. When historians read documents, maps and texts from the past, they have to be sensitive to the different historical backgrounds, the context in which information about the past was produced. So, maps are the sources through which we can trace to the historical changes and contexts. Then cartographers. Who are cartographers? They are the skilled artists who recorded these chronological effects in map. So, in map 1, according to Al-Idrisi, he has shown the South India in the north part, and then Sri Lanka on the Sri Lankan island on the top. But in map 2, all the subcontinents changed considerably. They have given a detailed name of all the coastal areas. Now historical records. We are going to start about new and old terminologies. If the context in which information is produced changes with time, what about language and meanings? Historical records exist in a variety of languages which have changed considerably over the years. Medieval Persian, for example, is different from modern Persian. The difference is not just with regard to grammar and vocabulary. The meanings of words also change over time. Take the term Hindustan, for example. Today we understand it as India. The modern nation state when the term was used in the 13th century by Minhaj-e-Siraj, a chronicler who wrote in Persian. He meant the areas of Punjab, Haryana, and the lands between the Ganga and the Yamuna. He used the term in a political sense for lands that were a part of the dominions of the Delhi Sultan. The areas included in this term shifted with the extent of the Sultanate, but the term never included South India. By contrast, in the early 16th century, Babur used Hindustan to describe the geography, the fauna and the culture of the inhabitants of the subcontinent. As we will see later in this chapter, this was somewhat similar to the way the 14th century poet Amir Khusrau used the word Hind. While the idea of the geographical and cultural entity like India did exist, the term Hindustan did not carry the political and national meanings which was associated with it today. Historians today have to be careful about the terms they use because they meant different things in the past. Take, for example, a simple term like foreigner. It is used today to mean someone who is not an Indian. In the medieval period, a foreigner was any stranger who appeared, say, in a given village, someone who was not a part of the society or culture. In Hindi, the term Pardesi might be used to describe such a person, and in Persian, Ajnabi. A city dweller, therefore, might have regarded a forest dweller as a foreigner, but two peasants living in the same village were not foreigners to each other, even though they may have had different religious or caste backgrounds. So in the early 16th century, Babur used the term Hindustan in order to describe the geography, the fauna and the culture of the inhabitants of the subcontinent. Amir Khusrau used the term Hindi in the similar sense in the 14th century. The word foreigner today means someone who is not an Indian, isn't it? But in the medieval period, a foreigner was any stranger who was a part of the same village but not a part of a particular society or culture. But now in present day, we call the foreigners means the people who don't belong to India. The synonyms word for foreigner in Hindi and Persian are Pardesi and Ajnabi. Next we have historians and their sources. Historians use different types of sources to learn about the past depending upon the period of their study and the nature of their investigation. Last year, for example, you read about ruler of the Gupta dynasty and Harshvardhana. In this book, you will read about the following 1000 years from roughly 700 to 1750. You will notice some continuity in the sources used by historians for the study of this period. They still rely on coins, inscriptions, architectures, and textual records for information. But there is also considerable discontinuity. The number and variety of textual records increased dramatically during this period. They slowly displaced other types of available information. Through this period, paper gradually became cheaper and more widely available. People used it to write holy texts, chronicles of rulers, letters and teachings of saints, petitions and judicial records, and for registers of accounts and taxes. Manuscripts were collected by wealthy people, rulers, monasteries, and temples. They were placed in libraries and archives. This manuscript and documents provide a lot of detailed information to historians, but they are also difficult to use. Now, archives, a place where documents and manuscripts are stored. Today, all national and state governments have archives where they keep all their old official records and transactions. There were no printing press in those days, so scripts copied manuscripts by hand. If you have ever copied a friend's homework, you would know that it is not a simple exercise. Sometimes you cannot read your friend's handwriting and are forced to guess what it's written. As a result, there are small but sufficient differences in your copy of your friend's work. Manuscript copying is somewhat similar. As scripts copied manuscripts, they also introduced small changes, a word here, a sentence there. These small differences grew over centuries of copying until manuscripts of the same text became substantially different from one another. This is a serious problem because we rarely find the original manuscript of the author today. We are totally dependent upon the copies made by later scripts. As a result, historians have to read about different manuscript versions of the same text to guess what the author had originally written. On occasion, authors revised their chronicles at different times. The 14th century chronicler Ziauddin Barani wrote his chronicle first in 1356 and another version 2 years later. The two differ from each other, but historians did not know about the existence of the first version until the 1960s. It remained lost in large library collection. So, historians and their sources: coins, inscriptions, architectures, textual records, and the basic sources used by the historians to study the past. Then, manuscripts collected from wealthy people, rulers, monasteries, and temples were placed in library and archives. These scripts and documents helped the historians with several detailed information. True, it was difficult to use them. As there was no printing press in those days, scribes used to copy down manuscripts by hand. The author used this revise their chronicles time to study. Then we saw Ziauddin Barani, a 14th century author, revised his chronicle for the first time in 1356, followed by another version 2 years later. But still, their two chronicles differ from each other until it was found out in the 1960s. Now, new social and political groups. The study of the 1,000 years between 700 and 1750 is a huge challenge to historians, largely because of the scale and variety of development that occurred over the period. At different moments in this period, new technologies made their appearance, like the Persian wheel irrigation. This is a Persian wheel used for irrigation. In this Persian wheel, there is a bucket attached with it. The spinning wheel in weaving and firearms in combat. New foods and beverages arrived in the subcontinent: potatoes, corn, chilies, tea, and coffee. Remember that all these innovations, new technologies, and crops came along with people who brought other ideas with them as well. As a result, this was a period of economic, political, social, and cultural changes. You will learn about some of these changes in chapter 5, 6, and 7. This was also a period of great mobility. Groups of people traveled a long distance in search of opportunity. The subcontinent held immense wealth and the possibilities for people to carve a fortune. One group of people who became important in this period were the Rajputs, a name derived from Rajputra, the son of a ruler. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, the term was applied more generally to a group of warriors who claimed Kshatriya caste status. The term included not just rulers and chieftains but also soldiers and commanders who served in the armies of different monarchs all over the subcontinent. a chivalric code of conduct, extreme valor, and a great sense of loyalty were the qualities attributed to Rajputs by their poets and bards. Other groups of people, such as the Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, Ahoms, and Kaishatas, caste of scribes and secretaries, also used the opportunities of the age to become politically important. Throughout this period, there was a gradual clearing of forests and extensions of agriculture, a change faster and more complete in some areas than in others. Changes in their habitat forced many forest dwellers to migrate. Others started tilling the land and became peasants. This new peasants group gradually began to be influenced by regional markets, chieftains, priests, monasteries, and temples. They become part of large complex societies and were required to pay taxes and offer goods and services to local lords. As a result, significant economic and social differences emerged amongst peasants. Some possessed more productive land, others also kept cattle, and some combined artisanal work with agricultural activity during the lean season. As society became more differentiated, people were grouped into jatis or subcastes and ranked on the basis of their backgrounds and their occupations. Ranks were not fixed permanently and varied according to the power, influence, and resources controlled by the members of the jati. The status of the same jati could vary from area to area. Jatis framed their own rules and regulations to manage the conduct of their members. These regulations were enforced by an assembly of elders, described in some areas as the Jati Panchayat. But Jatis were also required to follow the rules of their villages. Several villages were governed by a chieftain. Together they were only one small unit of a state. Now, region and empire. Large states like those of the Cholas, Tughlaqs, or Mughals encompassed many regions. A Sanskrit Prastuti, see in chapter number 2 for an example of a Prastuti, praising the Delhi Sultan Ghiyasuddin Balban, explained that he was a ruler of a vast empire that stretched from Bengal in the east to Ghazni in Afghanistan in the west and included all of South India. People of different regions, Gauda, Andhra, Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Gujarat, apparently fled before his armies. Historians regard this as exaggerate claims of conquest. At the same time, they tried to understand why rulers kept claiming to have control over different parts of the subcontinent. By 700, many regions already possess distinct geographical dimensions and their own language and cultural characteristics. You will learn more about this in chapter 9. They were also associated with specific ruling dynasties. There were considerable conflict between these states. Occasionally, dynasties like the Cholas, Khaljis, Tughlaqs, and Mughals were able to build an empire that was pan-regional, spanning diverse regions. Not all these comprised were equally stable or successful. Compare, for example, table 1 in chapter 3 and 4. What was the duration of rule of the Khalji and Mughal dynasties? When the Mughal Empire declined in the 18th century, it led to the re-emergence of regional states. Chapter 10. See, in chapter 1, it says that everything that detailed about the Mughals, about the Cholas, about the Khiljis, about the Tughlaqs, everything you will learn in details in this book. But years of imperial planned regional rule had altered the character of the regions. Across most of the subcontinent, the regions were left with the legacies of the big and small states that had ruled over them. This was apparent in the emergence of many distinct and shared traditions. In the realms of governance, the management of the economy, elite cultures, and language. Through the 1,000 years between 700 and 1750, the character of the different regions did not grow in isolation. This region felt the impact of larger pan-regional force of integration without ever quite losing their distinctiveness. Old and New Religion. The 1,000 years of history that we're exploring witnessed major developments in religious traditions. People believe in the divine was sometimes deeply personal, but more usually it was collective. Collective belief in a supernatural agency. Religion was often closely connected with the social and economic organization of local communities. As the social worlds of this group altered, so too did their beliefs. It was during this period that important changes occurred in what we call Hinduism today. This included the worship of new deities, the construction of temples by royalty, and the growing importance of Brahmanas, the priests, as dominant groups in society. Their knowledge of Sanskrit texts earned the Brahmins a lot of respect in society. Their dominant position was consolidated by the support of their patrons, new rulers searching for prestige. One of the major developments of this period was the emergence of the idea of bhakti, of a loving personal deity that devotees could reach without the aid of priests or elaborate rituals. You will be learning about this and other traditions in chapter 8. This was also the period when new religion appeared in the subcontinent. Merchants and migrants first brought the teachings of the Holy Quran to India in the 17th century. Muslims regard this Quran as their holy book and accept the sovereignty of the one God, Allah, whose love, mercy, and bounty embrace all those who believe in Him without regret to social background. Many rulers were patrons of Islam, and the ulama, learned theologian, and jurists. And like Hinduism, Islam was interpreted in a variety of ways by its followers. They were the Sai Muslims who believed that the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, was the legitimate leader of the Muslim community, and the Sunni Muslims who accepted the authority of the early leaders, Khalifas, of the community and the succeeding Khalifas. There were other important differences between the various schools of law, Hanafi and Safi, mainly in India, and in theology and mystic traditions. So, like Hindus, Islam was also interpreted in many ways, and the followers of Islam were divided into two subsectors, the Shias and the Sunnis. And then, in the old and new religion, the teaching of the Holy Quran was brought to India in the 17th century. Then also the Hinduism saw many great changes which included the worship of new deities. Next we have thinking about time and historical periods. Historians do not see time just as passing of hours, days or years, as a clock or a calendar. Time also reflects changes in social and economic organization in the persistence and transformations of ideas and belief. The study of time is made somewhat easier by dividing the past into large segments, periods that possess shared characteristics. In the middle of the 19th century, British historians divided the history of India into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. This division was based on the idea that the religion of rulers was the only important historical change and that there were no significant developments. in the economy, society, or culture. Such a division also ignored the rich diversity of the subcontinent. Free historians follow this periodization today. Most looked economic and social factors to characterize the major elements of different moments of the past. The histories you read last year, including a wide range of early societies, hunter-gatherers, early farmers, people living in towns and villages, and early empires and kingdoms. The histories you will be studying this year are often described as medieval. You will find out more about the spread of peasant societies, the rise of regional and imperial state formation, sometimes at the cost of pastoral and forest people, the development of Hinduism and Islam as major religion, and the arrival of European trading companies. So, in class 6, you have learned about the ancient time, and in this book, you are going to learn about the medieval time. This 1,000 years of Indian history witnessed considerable change. After all, the 16th and the 18th centuries were quite different from the 8th or the 11th. Therefore, describing the entire period as one historical unit is not without its problem. Moreover, the medieval period is often contrasted with the modern period. Modernity carries with it a sense of material progress and intellectual advancement. This seems to suggest that the medieval period was lacking in any change whatsoever. But of course, we know this was not the case. During these 1,000 years, the societies of the subcontinent were transformed often, and economics in several regions reached a level of prosperity that attracted the interest of European trading companies. As you read this book, look out for signs of change and the historical processes at work. Also, whenever you can, compare what you read in this book with what you read last year. Look out for changes and continuities wherever you can, and look at the world around you to see what else has changed or remained the same. So students, we are going to learn more about the medieval period, and then we are going to have a look back on the last year, whatever you have read. We are going to compare. Now, this is the end of the chapter. Next time I will meet you with a fresh new chapter. Till then students, take care of yourself and thank you so much.